Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Green Flag. I'm your host, Lukas Wacker, and with me, as always, we have Kyle Cushman. And welcome to the F1 preview episode for the Portuguese Grand Prix in Portimao. This track obviously returning this season after it made its debut last season. A great race last season for Formula One, and thankfully it has returned to the calendar this season. And when we were recording this is after qualifying has already occurred, so we know the pole sitter for this one being Valtteri Bottas. We'll talk about that a little bit later on in the episode. We got some news and notes to get to quickly before that, and of course we have our fantasy picks for this week. And we posted it on our Instagram page already. If you haven't checked that out, make sure you go give a like on that post itself. But we'll break it down in a more in-depth fashion on the episode here today. But let's get into the news and notes, Kyle, shall we?
Let's do it.
It's been a little bit of a busier week on the F1 news, if it's concerning the F1 news. They announced a sprint qualifying format for a select few races this season, 3 being exact. We don't know exactly where they're going to be as of yet. British Grand Prix has basically been confirmed already. We're expecting Monza and Brazil to be the other 2 for the remainder of the season, but that's still yet to be confirmed. But let's look at how this kind of new sprint qualifying format breaks down. So on the Fridays themselves, we still have practice. We have a practice session of 60 minutes there before going into our standard qualifying that we usually see on a traditional race weekend for a Saturday, where it's going to be Q1, Q2, and Q3. That will set the lineup for the sprint qualifying race on the Saturday. But before the sprint qualifying race on the Saturday itself, we have a second practice session. There's only 2 practice sessions per weekend in this sprint format, and that'll be 60 minutes as well. And then we go into the sprint qualifying format of 100-kilometer race, debating, we'll see the lap count varies depending on the size of racetrack, of course. And then the results from that grid itself will set the lineup for Sunday's Grand Prix. That will be its regularly scheduled distance of whatever it is for that specific weekend. But in that sprint qualifying race itself, the top 3 finishers earn championship points as well as constructor points for those constructors. So first gets 3 points, second gets 2 points, third gets 1 point, and that's kind of the gist of it. It's a unique kind of take, similar to what F2 kind of does in a way for their weekend as well. So curious to see how it all play out. It's just essentially another way for Mercedes and Red Bull to get points unless something crazy happens in these sprint qualifying races. But your thoughts on this newly designed idea here for Formula One, trying to appeal to a more wide range audience here and give them more on-track racing action throughout the course of a race weekend?
Yeah, this is an interesting one. For starters, I think it's good that Formula One is trying stuff. I think it's good to test out different things. I would have actually liked to see them try multiple different formats of this rather than just trying this one format for 3 races. I would have rather seen 2 or even 3 different formats tried over like 9 races or something like that, because you have 23 scheduled races on the calendar. So you've got the leeway to kind of work with it. But for the 3 races that they'll be doing with this, I don't love it. In terms of the impact it'll have on a weekend, I don't think it'll be massive, because you're essentially adding just 100 kilometers to the race distance, if we're being honest. And I think it takes a little bit away from the spectacle that qualifying is and should be as well. So starting with just the format itself and then maybe later branching on to what we would have preferred. The format itself, you've got qualifying on the Friday, which is definitely different, to say the least. But the Saturday sprint race, I think this weekend in the qualifying we got from Portimao, I think is a great example as to one of the reasons maybe not to have sprint qualifying. Because when you look at the grid that we got from qualifying here, you have Valtteri Bottas on pole, Hamilton second, Verstappen third, but then other different spots throughout that. You've got Esteban Ocon 6th. You've got Sebastian Vettel in the top 10 for the first time in forever. But then you've also got Lance Stroll starting deep in the field. You've got Daniel Ricciardo starting deep in the field. When I look at those results and how those results kind of shape up for a very intriguing Grand Prix on a Sunday, that intrigue is going to be taken away by a sprint qualifying race in the format that it currently is. You're going to start this race with the current grid. You're going to go 20, 25 laps, depending on the length of the racetrack. And a lot of those things are going to be resolved. And it's going to be a much more quote unquote normal grid on the Sunday for the actual feature race unless somebody crashes. And I think that's kind of the gamble for this, that people are going to be battling or something's going to happen on that like turn one start or something. And one of the big contenders might have to start at the back or something like that. So I think that's where Formula One is maybe hoping things go for the sprint qualifying race. It's a short, condensed race. Got to make your moves quicker. Got to be quick out of the gate. Can't have any faults. No mandatory pit stop either. So that's not a factor as well. And then going into the Sunday main race, a lot of the grid will be kind of formalized. So I don't love the idea. I don't hate the idea. Just kind of content with it. Because if we're being honest, it really is just a 100-kilometer extension of the race, just held on a Saturday with a red flag, bring it over to the Sunday. Which, I mean, if we get more of the front 3-4 battling, I mean, not many people are going to complain about that, but I do kind of look at this and go, okay, if we get a surprise result in qualifying, we're not going to get that payoff on the Sunday like we normally would. So interesting to see how it plays out, of course. But I think that there were some better options that they could potentially could have gone with.
I think there's just two sides to this kind of approach for the drivers themselves. You know, they could go really aggressive in this sprint qualifying race on the Saturday and try and make up as many positions as they can to help themselves for the Sunday. Or do they want to just try and minimize the risk here and make sure that they get the car to Sunday and in a reasonable starting position and then go for it on in a regular race distance? I think there's just two schools of thought here. Of course, it's a racing driver in itself, so they're always going to want to advance their position. But some, you know, may want to play it a little bit more cautious than others. If they have a really good qualifying effort on the Friday, they don't want to mess that up necessarily in the race and go too aggressive. And then just, you know, all that work that they did on the Friday is all for naught for the actual big event where it scores you the most points on the Sunday. I think, you know, the top four are going to look at it as a massive opportunity. It could make or break a drivers' championship with the way things are going right now. So the top four are going to really look at that as an opportunity. But beyond that, I could see it definitely being a different kind of a race from then on back if there's not really that surprise top four kind of qualifier that we rarely see, with Sergio Perez kind of solidifying that fourth spot, it seems, for right now. He's done a very good job so far. So then it's kind of like the best of the rest. Who wants to get up there for fifth place in that kind of sprint qualifying effort? And how much can they really do in about 20, 25 laps given the racetrack itself? So I wish there was, I mean, if we want to get into what we could have looked like, it's just, I wish there could have been a mandatory pit stop. I think that would have been an interesting kind of strategic element to the race itself, even though tire wear wouldn't be much of an issue over 20 laps with considering the compounds at some of these racetracks. But saying that, just the timing of a pit stop kind of thing could, you know, spice things up. You can't double stack your force. That would just cost you way too much time in a sprint qualifying format like this. So it would just be a cool element there, because the field would not get as spread out over a longer distance. So you couldn't find that gap in the field. So it would have just made that the racing itself for the Sunday race even more exciting, because some guys may have a bad pit stop or something may go wrong, and then they're kind of back in that mid-teens or the late single digits. So that's just my kind of 2 cents on the issue. It's on one of my issues itself. I think it's obviously great that they're trying something like this. It's going to be big events as well, with most likely Italy, obviously Great Britain, and then Brazil. Those are 3 marquee events on the calendar. So, and at the interesting points,
not confirmed or anything, but it's likely that's probably the direction they would go. But
it's just, they're going to have big implications on the championship as well. You know, like they're really big historic tracks. And, you know, I think especially for Brazil being so late in the season, very curious to see how the strategic elements that may happen in the British Grand Prix, which will come first out of all of these, can maybe, you know, decide their situation come Brazil later on in the season, if they found a way that works best for them, or if they want to alter their strategy. I think it spices things up for those race weekends specifically. I don't think I'd want it long term by any means, but it's a cool concept in itself, but it definitely needs a little bit of fine tuning.
Yeah, and when we get to the fine tuning, I think a couple of ideas that I would have preferred, starting with, if you want to keep the sprint qualifying kind of format specifically, is actually do it more like the F2 way, where you have qualifying as its own entity that still impacts the grid for the quote unquote feature race, the Sunday race. But then you have a top 10 invert for a sprint qualifying race, or sprint race, I should say. Get rid of the qualifying label. So you still get qualifying, you still get that qualifying result applied to that main Sunday race, so nothing changes like that. But you get an additional shorter sprint race with a top 10 invert where some of those more mid-table teams have a legitimate shot to get decent points in a sprint race. And so when you look at a Formula 2 weekend, and obviously they've added another race and have a bit of a different format than strictly that. But when you look at Formula 2, it's extremely, extremely rare that you see somebody win a sprint race and the feature race. It's usually one or the other. It's rarely both. And to a further extent, it's usually pretty uncommon to see somebody get on the podium for both of those. So when I think about how close the mid-table is and how great a top 10 invert for a short sprint race would be, when you look at some of the tracks on the schedule, when you look at some of the teams, like if a Lewis Hamilton and a Max Verstappen are starting like 9th and 10th, and you've got like Pierre Gasly, Charles Leclerc on the front row, and you've got like 25, 30 laps, I think that could be a very, very entertaining product. And then you still get that payoff of whatever the qualifying result is on the Sunday. So I would have preferred leaning more into the sprint race idea. I can understand why the top teams obviously wouldn't vote for that, and they'd much prefer just kind of making it a qualifying thing. It's minimal points only for the top 3 finishers and all these kind of things that kind of make it a very safe idea for them, unless they all crash in the first turn, which, to be fair, is a possibility. But for a sprint qualifying result, I don't think people will be pushing as hard into turn 1 as you would for a race, just given the amount of points on the line. The other thing that I'd like to see kind of tried with is one-shot qualifying, and maybe not just
F1
one shot
2020 in real life, eh?
Not just necessarily one-shot qualifying for like the entire thing and everybody has one lap. I like how the V8 supercars do it, where you have one qualifying session there. You get down to a top 10, and then the top 10 shootout goes, and you get to be on board and see each little mistake that each driver makes over the course of a lap, how hard they're pushing it into each corner. I really like that element of qualifying, and in the current format of qualifying, you really only get that after the fact. You get the onboard lap or the pole lap after it's happened. So just kind of looking at some of the different things that they could try, I think one-shot qualifying would probably result in some different kind of grids as well in terms of the top 10. But that's a little bit different from what they're trying here with the sprint race.
Are you saying like you would put like one-shot qualifying instead of like the sprint race format? Is that what you're saying? Or like for qualifying itself?
Either or, mix of both, like whatever you want to try.
Okay. I was just wanted to clarify that, but
I mean, if we're talking my ideal world, I would have one qualifying session. Top 10 from that qualifying session goes to the next one, which is essentially like a Q3 as it is now, except instead of it being like 12 minutes and everybody goes and whatever your times are at the end of that, it's 10 until 1 from the previous go, and one-shot qualifying. So you get the warm-up lap, go for your one lap, and then it's done, on board for the whole thing. And then lead into that probably for a sprint race, just given the way that it's going. But I would honestly be fine with one-shot qualifying straight into the Grand Prix or having the sprint race.
Interesting. I don't really consider one-shot qualifying in any respect really for, my ideal situation. But I think there's definitely potential with it. I just don't know if it would carry over from like, the North American success of like a NASCAR qualifying where, it's like your one lap kind of thing. And then I don't know if it would translate as well with a worldwide audience with Formula One being a one lap. I do think it would be good from my perspective.
The thing for me is that in watching qualifying, we're only getting like the last like 3 turns of a lap is usually how it goes. Like you rarely see an entire,
especially.
Yeah, like it's very like I think the best thing about qualifying is how hard people are pushing, and you're getting the fastest lap. And I think supercars do a great job of that in capturing that spectacle in just having that kind of top 10 shootout where you get to see the entire lap on board, different angles, and how hard they're pushing it with sector times and how close they are with the track evolving over that those 10 laps as well. I think that would make for more entertaining viewing than 12 minutes seeing multiple different cars for like a couple corners in the current format.
I think you make a valid point there where, it's only 3 races, so why not try something like that? Like I think that there's
and
value
that
in something like that.
Comes into what I was talking about earlier, where if you want to try this format, sure, try it for 3 races, but let's try this also for 3 races, and let's try something else for 3 races, because you've got 23 to work with. Why only take 3 and try stuff into the future when you've got a new generation of car coming? Why not try a bunch of stuff this season?
Yeah, makes sense. I do. I think that's a good point that you made there. So for me, I don't know. I think there's potential with this. Of course, there's some things I would much rather prefer. I think the top 10 invert thing was almost a necessity if you're going to do something like this, just to spice that sprint race up and, allow some of these midfield teams to get a couple of points maybe, like if they could get a victory or something like that. I think that would bode wonders for a sport where, it's always the top teams winning every single weekend, it seems. And, the mid pack is just kind of salvaging, 5th to 10th place points.
As well as into the future with this next generation of car, you're hoping to condense the field as well. So into the future, maybe we don't even need something like this to spice up a Grand Prix or a weekend or anything like that. That's obviously the goal, but for trying stuff this year, I just feel like it kind of misses the mark a little bit.
I think it would make that Friday qualifying mean all that more to make Q3. Like if you made that qualifying Q3, then you're like, okay, how do you want to position yourself here? Do you want to give it your all to try and set yourself up for Sunday?
Yeah.
Or do I try and make some points here potentially for that Saturday race? It would have been really, really cool to see that. Of course, the top teams are going to vote against something like that because it gets them away from getting points. But
there's more mid-table backmarker teams than there are the big teams.
Yeah, exactly. So I think there would have been a lot of value in something like that. And for a sport that wants to continue to grow, and I'm sure they want probably more than 20 cars on the grid, that would maybe be a good marketing tactic for a new team to come into, like saying if this something or a format like this would work where a top 10 invert would showcase some of the midfield teams that maybe don't get all the TV time or aren't an essential part of every single race weekend, showing that there is some value there with those teams and they can get that TV time, and as well as they can get some results on the track as well if they have the investment. And with the, the cap coming into Formula One, the North American kind of cap version of professional sports, it should make that kind of backmarker teams bridge that gap. Of course, that's their intent, to the front runners and make it more of a competitive field. If more teams want to come in, Porsche, something like that, Jaguar, all these kinds of different, manufacturers or constructors are looking at Formula One potentially in the future. I think something like that would have been, invaluable for a sport like this that has the opportunity to, as you mentioned, with a 23 race calendar, why not try something like that? It makes total sense. If it's a bust, then of course you don't look at it. It's very similar to what they tried to do with that old qualifying format where they tried to switch it up and then it didn't work at Bahrain. It was just mayhem. It was so stupid. But there is, a learning experience there for Formula One to say, okay, that doesn't work. Our audience didn't like it. The drivers didn't like it. The teams didn't like it. Scrap it. Let's just go back to what worked. I think there's a possibility here where that could be the same thing with the sprint qualifying format, but at least So that's the most important thing for me here in just trialing some stuff out. And I agree with you there that it would have been really good if they tried different kind of formats for each of the 3 race weekends, or even more so than 3. Don't limit yourself to just 3. Maybe try 5. I think 10's maybe a bit pushing it with how good the grid is right now and how competitive that front runner is. You wouldn't want too many gimmicks every single race weekend or every second race weekend kind of thing. But having them at select races this season, I think would be really, really great.
Yeah, you also wouldn't want to overdo it to where new fans are coming in and trying to watch each weekend, and it's a different rule and different format every weekend as well. So definitely going on the conservative side with just trying it for 3 race weekends, but we'll see how it goes. Again, I think it'll just be like a 100-kilometer extension of the actual race. We'll see if it actually does mix things up or if it maybe makes the grid even more normalized. But to be fair, when you think about things, qualifying is more predictable than a race or 20 laps into a race. So we'll see how things go in that regard. But definitely interested to see first when it debuts and then secondly how it goes.
Exactly. So pretty interesting news there from Formula One that they announced something like this.
Yeah.
We'll definitely keep you updated and talk about it as the season rolls along for these select races where they do get announced that the sprint qualifying format is taking
just
place.
Finally, I think an underrated prospect of this as well is just the one practice session before qualifying as well on the Friday, because it goes practice, qualifying, and then practice, sprint, race, and then race. So definitely more difficult to figure out what you got going on with your car, setups, all that kind of stuff, acclimatize to the track. So definitely interested to see how that impacts the weekend as well.
Especially for Formula One, where we see the first couple of practice sessions be very chaotic for some of these guys, where they're trying to find a grip with the track and trying to find that limit of the car.
For lots of teams,
And I think having that one practice session before qualifying, that is a good point there, Kyle. A very underrated element to this entire weekend.
Honestly, it might be the most important element of it all.
that could spice up that sprint race essentially and get you some surprise results where the sprint race is worth watching, and then it could complicate the actual grid itself on the Sunday. So curious to see how it all pans out, and should be fun to see if it works, what doesn't work, if it's here to stay, what parts of it are here to stay. Formula One has got their hands full with those weekends, but should be fun nonetheless. The last little bit of news here, the Turkish Grand Prix has been officially added back to the F1 calendar this season, taking the place of our beloved Canadian Grand Prix. We talked about that on the show previously, where that was suspected to be canceled. It is now officially canceled, and Turkey is taking that place this upcoming season in a couple of weeks, really, about a month and a half-ish kind of thing, I would say, for the Canadian Grand Prix. So Turkey delivered last year a crazy qualifying session. Of course, that was new tarmac that they put onto it, so it was super slippery for all the drivers, no matter what the conditions were, almost undrivable at some points, but it made for a really entertaining race in itself. Was voted by the Formula One fans as the race of the year for them as well. So it delivered on all accounts. We'll see how much it can deliver this time around. It's a very good racing track itself, so looking forward to seeing how it all plays out. But your thoughts on Turkey returning to the F1 calendar once again?
Yeah, obviously it's heartbreaking not having the Canadian Grand Prix. It was always going to be difficult to get that June 13th date in. It was always wishful thinking, but just given the state of things in Canada, it's just not feasible right now. Probably neither is Toronto, Indy, or anything like that. Yeah. But we'll see a return to the grid in 2022 when that race will be an absolute banger. But for now, being replaced by Istanbul, by the Turkish Grand Prix here, is about as good of a replacement race as you could possibly hope for, right? When you're talking about, but honestly, the way that things went last year, it might honestly be a toss-up. Obviously, you would want a German Grand Prix just given the history there, but Istanbul is a great track. It showed it last year. Obviously, it won't be as chaotic given the surfaces had time to rubber in and everything like that. Like, those Formula One cars aren't going to be the first ones basically going on a brand new track.
They're not going to need street cars to go onto the track and try and rubber it in
exactly,
this time at midnight.
Overnight. I mean, if they do, I'd be super on board for it.
I think those guys should just get championship points, just see who can win it.
Yeah, but obviously it's basically the backup scenario they had the entire time. Yeah, where it was always going to be unlikely to get to Canada. Put it on the schedule just in case you can. But in the scenario where you're unlikely to or not able to, which is the scenario we currently find ourselves in, Turkish Grand Prix fits into the schedule very well in terms of the travel that they have to go through. Mm-hmm. Azerbaijan before that, French Grand Prix after that, so it fits in terms of the travel there. And it's a race that a lot of people enjoyed last year, so I kind of think checks all the boxes. Unfortunate not to get the Canadian Grand Prix because the circuit Gilles Villeneuve is one of the best in the world. But that being said, Turkey and Istanbul, about as good of a pick that you could get to replace it.
Yeah, I would say so. So looking forward to it. Disappointed. It's a bittersweet kind of decision. It was
expected though. We were expecting it for a while, so at least it wasn't like a out of left field thing to really break our hearts.
I know. I'm still heartbroken though, even though I knew it was coming a mile away. So unfortunate. But in 2022. The next generation of Formula One will return to the circuit Gilles Villeneuve. So looking forward to that opportunity that Canada will rightfully be back on the calendar. I hope there's a German Grand Prix here at some point. Maybe something else gets canceled along the way.
Surely that's like the next backup.
I want to see, either the Hockenheim Ring or Nürburgring come back to the calendar this season, because I think it's so unfortunate that there's no German Grand Prix on the calendar. I think that's a huge staple. Yeah. Formula One's very popular over there, but just my German heritage coming out of me there. Sorry, but
mix on the schedule is what it would have been.
It would have been great. Vettel at a new team. I think it would have been really, really great for them to try and get that in. But you never know. Maybe there is something around the turn where something happens and Germany can get on the calendar at some point in time this season. But that does it for the news and notes for today's episode. Let's get into the fantasy picks that we made for the Portuguese Grand Prix. A little bit more action on your end. If you haven't seen the Instagram post, as I alluded to start off the episode, Kyle was a busy man. Used all of his 3 free selections for this race weekend. So he's made quite a few adjustments. It's looking like it's paid off so far, but let's look at what the lineups are for this weekend. We'll go with the similarities, I think, here first. We'll just state them, and then we'll kind of go into the why we decided to keep them the same. So for myself, I've kept 4 or 5, I guess, of the 6 that I had the previous outing at Imola. Max Verstappen, Pierre Gasly, Carlos Sainz, Lando Norris, and the McLaren as the constructor are all the same for me this weekend. Only one switch, what we will talk about in a little bit here. But just a fairly straightforward decision for myself. But who do you have for your similarities for your lineup?
Yep, I'm keeping Verstappen, Sainz, and Red Bull. So I've got 3 big changes all coming to the driver lineup as well, keeping the constructor, and 2 of the bigger ones there in Verstappen and Sainz.
Let's start off with Max Verstappen. It's pretty straightforward why we both kept him in our lineups. He's such a good value pick right now, and for his price being that much lower than Lewis Hamilton's at the current moment, it makes sense to keep him in your lineup. And Red Bull's just been super strong so far to start the season. Of course, a race victor, a pole sitter. He's got all the tools in the making to have a really great season. And if you have Max Verstappen in your lineup, I do not think you should drop him at any point in time, no matter what the circumstances are this season.
No, Verstappen's value is just going to keep climbing as the season goes. It's a little bit surprising, honestly, how big the difference is between Verstappen and even Bottas, and up to Hamilton, of course, being the most expensive. But obviously, you need one of the big 3 in kind of your lineup here, and Verstappen's the easy pick to do so, just because it opens up so many other possibilities for the rest of your lineup.
I think the next similarity that we have, I guess, that we kept the same, Carlos Sainz. He's looked really good this weekend for Ferrari, leading the team, it seems, over there instead of Charles Leclerc this weekend. And he's come to grips with that Ferrari much quicker than maybe I was anticipating. When you look at what Daniel Ricciardo's doing with McLaren, I think, the difference that we're seeing in performance so far this season is quite substantial. This weekend is obviously going to make it more amplified, but at the same time, I think Sainz has been consistent across the board, while Ricciardo has been more vocal on his struggles with the car itself and getting to grips with it. So that'll take time, of course, but for Carlos Sainz himself, he's starting P5 in this one for the Grand Prix, looking really solid for this upcoming weekend. He scored 11 points already this weekend, so leading the charge over there at Ferrari. I believe he finished in the top 10 here last year. I wouldn't say for sure. Did. He finished pretty good here last year, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yes, he did. Yeah. Carlos Sainz is actually my turbo driver, so I can take the lead on this one here. I think it's a combination here of the Ferraris and Sainz at this track, because of course, thinking back to Portimao last year, the hectic start where Sainz goes up and leads the race off the start, Raikkonen makes up about 1,000 positions off the start. But the big thing is McLaren here last year were solid but not incredible. Sainz qualified P7, Norris qualified P8, Sainz finished P6. And Norris finished P13. So Sainz with a really strong qualifying effort, really strong race. And then the Ferraris as well. Leclerc P4 in qualifying, P4 in the race finish. Even Vettel, even though qualifying was bad in P15, still got a point there in P10. So the Ferraris were good here last year. They're better this year. We saw it in qualifying. We saw it throughout practices. That's why Sainz is my turbo driver. I like him in the race. He exceeded my expectations in qualifying. So I'm feeling good about that one so far. We'll see how things play out in the race. But I'm a big fan of Carlos Sainz here in Portugal.
Yeah, very close to his home country there in Spain as well. So maybe there's a little bit of linkage there. Trying to impress a little bit. Spanish Grand Prix is
next, right? So a nice little stretch here for Carlos in terms of proximity to home, at least.
Stupid Spanish Grand Prix.
Hey, you know what? There's no testing at Catalonia this year, so maybe it's at least a little bit better.
No, I'm not even looking forward to that race whatsoever. Like it's just so bad. Like, oh God, why do we do this to ourselves? But for Carlos Sainz, no brainer. It translated over to the McLaren, which has been a little bit off the pace than what we've seen in the first 2 rounds of this season. Ferrari looks to be that 3rd best team this weekend, if you want to call them that. So
I think so.
I think think they're a pretty decent bet, and Carlos Sainz is a pretty decent bet to probably finish maybe where he even is starting right now. We'll talk about him a little bit later on, most likely for maybe the best of the rest for our predictions. But Carlos Sainz, definitely one to keep your eye on. Let's go into your, I guess you can start this one off, your Lando Norris, because it is a similarity that we both have, even though it is a switch up for you there.
Yeah, last time out, I switched Norris to Ricciardo. I took the swing there. Didn't play off, obviously. I was really liking Ricciardo coming off of the result at Imola last year with Renault, hoping that it would play to a good result for McLaren. And as we saw this weekend as well, has really kind of struggled so far to come to grips with the McLaren car so far, whereas Norris very comfortable with that car, obviously being in the team for a couple of years now, coming off of some really great results, kind of feeding into some momentum coming into this weekend, even though McLaren wasn't going to be the third best car in my view, obviously, as we've seen through practice and qualifying now. I still think that for the value there at Norris, his monetary value in terms of F1 fantasy is just going to keep climbing. So even if he doesn't go up and get you a podium every single weekend, he's still going to be a consistent threat to finish in Q3, finish inside the top 10 and keep that value rising.
Yeah, I'm on the Lando Norris train 100%. This guy, I think he's got the world ahead of him here with potential. I think this season he's going to be lights out. He was a bit questionable through the practice sessions so far, but then in qualifying, once again, he delivers a lap that is very capable of putting him in a position to get a good finish here at Portimao, despite, maybe being a little bit behind the pace of what we expect maybe from the McLaren of this season. Starting P7, so it's probably a little lower than where he would have liked to be. Of course, he was almost on the front row at Imola if he doesn't get his lap time deleted there.
I think their goal at this point has to be P5 basically every week to be kind of that best of the rest position. Anything higher, obviously, is awesome success.
Yeah.
P7 is fine. I'm sure they won't be upset about that starting position. But I think looking at how things played out, I think they would have been a little bit disappointed not to get P6 there from Ocon.
Probably. Yeah, that makes sense. When you look at what the Alpine has done so far this season and where McLaren's been, that's definitely going to be a little bit of a gut punch. But at the same time, Norris did finish 13th here last season. So I think there's a bit of a give and take here. It's not his strongest track by any means, it seems. So I would, it may not be the strongest weekend for Lando Norris across the whole season, but I think there's just value to keep him in your lineup here long term, just based off of his price tag and how well and how consistent he is this entire season.
He costs less than Lance Stroll and Sebastian Vettel still.
Absolutely.
That's just insane. So that value is just going to keep rising. Even if he doesn't get a massive point stay, he's still going to keep getting more and more expensive, which is going to help out your team if you got him in your lineup.
All righty. Let's go to AlphaTauri here next. We have both ends of the spectrum here, Pierre Gasly and Yuki Tsunoda. You start us off with your difference here in Yuki Tsunoda.
Yeah, so Tsunoda, I only have in my lineup because of the situation that I'm in. I took the gamble last time out with Ricciardo and Russell. It was looking pretty solid with Russell there specifically until the crash. And that really hurt kind of the fallout for my race, and Ricciardo just having a fine result. So Ricciardo goes down in price. Russell doesn't improve the way I was expecting him to. I was expecting 200,000-300,000 increase for Russell if he was getting a points finish at 6.2 mil. He would have skyrocketed up, really helped out my team. Wasn't the case, and so I'm still stuck at just 100.2 million for my budget. And because of that, I couldn't fit in Gasly and Ocon to my lineup, and I really liked Ocon this weekend. So instead of going with Russell, I decided to take the swing on Tsunoda, and I expected him to get out-qualified by Russell. My hope is that the AlphaTauris have some race pace, and that's looking back to last season where in this race, Mr. Pierre Gasly qualified P9, but then finished P5. So he had a very strong outing. The Daniel Kvyat had some issues, so he finished a couple laps down. So that's not really a great reference point there. Tsunoda's had some issues so far this year, but as we saw in Bahrain when he was able to finish the race, had a very strong finish inside the top 10. I'm hoping for more of the same and rebounding from maybe a bit of a lackluster qualifying performance. But as kind of my last entry to the lineup, I was kind of going with a cheap guy that's got a good car that could potentially outperform it.
Yeah, and he's got the opportunity to gain you some positions come race day as well. So that'll be good.
I think an important thing as well, this is Tsunoda's first ever race weekend at Portimao. This isn't a track that he's ran in Formula 3, in Formula 2, and obviously in Formula 1 up until this weekend because it's his first dang year. So inexperience at this track versus everybody else that's at least had last year as a reference point. A lot of these drivers don't have a lot of experience at this circuit. So a lot of people in the same boat, but Tsunoda specifically, no experience coming into things just to get to Q2, qualify P14, hopefully make up some positions as he comes to grips with the track on Sunday. That's basically what I'm hoping for, taking the swing on him.
Yeah, that's a good bet. For me, Pierre Gasly is just a no-brainer for me this weekend.
Yeah, Gasly I wanted to have, yeah.
I'm not going to – despite him not getting the best finishes to start this season compared to what maybe we were expecting, he's had some bad luck, of course, in Bahrain with the front wing incident. Last week at Imola, he made, or 2 weeks ago at Imola, he made a couple of mistakes throughout the race and, he kind of beat himself up over it. But here, just get a solid top 10 day for me. I don't know how well he's going to get. Like, he could get to P6, P7 range from P9. I think that would be very, very manageable for Pierre Gasly come race time. But if he finishes where he places, I'm not going to be too upset at the end of the day. I have a pretty decent points lead over the group that we have in our fantasy league right now. So if I have a little bit of a rougher week,
don't get too comfy there.
No, it's very early on. I'm not getting too comfy, but I feel good about what I've done so far in the first 2 weeks, which has allowed me to do my difference, which we'll talk about in a second. But for Pierre Gasly, I'm playing the long game here. I don't want to take him out of my lineup really anytime soon. The AlphaTauri seems to be having good pace to start this season, but as we have talked about prior to the show recording, they are going to be switching over to the 2022 program, most likely sooner than most other teams, so that could falter in the long run for their race pace and their qualifying pace as well. So got to judge it week by week with Pierre Gasly, but for right now, I'm comfortable with keeping him in my center spot in my lineup. So difference for me. This is a big shift for me, and I have no idea how I was able to pull this off with the budget, but I was able to, and I was ecstatic that I was able to. Unfortunately, I am a dummy, and I did not turbo him like I wanted to. I totally forgot. I didn't realize I didn't turbo him, but I made a switch. Charles Leclerc comes out of my lineup, who I was really wanting to put in my lineup for Imola, but he comes out just due to budgetary reasons. And I was able to squeak in none other than Sergio Perez into his spot. I like the way that car looked this weekend. He seems pretty confident with it, showed some pretty decent long-run speed. I thought he was going to actually get that qualifying performance that we kind of been waiting for him for the first 2 races of the season. He finally executes this weekend, gets you into P4, of course, behind Verstappen, which, Verstappen's going to get that little bit of extra bonus points of outscoring his placing his teammate. But for me, Perez, I think he's going to be in the top 5. He should finish where he starts at least, if not better, based off of Red Bull's race pace. Not to say that Mercedes is any slouch this weekend, but I think with this weekend itself, this is the first opportunity that we're going to see Mercedes and Red Bull go head-to-head, and Red Bull can finally split the strategy amongst 2 different drivers to try and mess with the Mercedes, because I imagine they're going to stay relatively close within that probably top 10 seconds to the leader kind of ish. If I wanted to make an estimate, maybe a little bit more than that, but nothing more than 15 seconds to the leader, especially by the time the first round of pit stops come around. So I think the undercut could be a massive strategy here for Red Bull, or the overcut, whichever seems to be best for them. And that was one of the big points that I made in the preseason episode that we did with our constructor predictions. I wanted to see Red Bull split the strategy on the Mercedes because they've never had this opportunity before. That second seat's always been kind of the mid-single digits back in 6th to 7th, where they have not been even remotely close to challenging or trying to differ with Mercedes strategy. It's always been one entity with Max Verstappen, and you can only do so much with one driver. But now that you have 2, I like what they've got with Sergio Perez right now. Finishing P4 in qualifying, 10 points on the weekend so far. I think he's going to be a solid race candidate here, potentially for a podium if they can split the Mercedes on strategy or even on raw pace itself. So for me, taking out Charles Leclerc, there's no really rhyme or reason why Leclerc has to come out except for just budgetary reasons. He was the one that was the closest to the cap budget, that was close to Perez, that I can make it work. And I'm going to not take out a lower guy in a budget value position than a guy like Leclerc, who I think was going to be outscored by Sainz already this weekend in itself. So I liked my decision so far. I wish I turboed him if I'm not an idiot, but 2 weekends in a row, fantasy has been screwing me with for my own stupidity, really, for NASCAR and Formula One.
Yeah, I mean, he's the highest potential guy outside of the big three, I guess you would say, including Bottas with
What
the
are we,
Mercedes car
2018
there.
NASCAR? Big three?
Hey, I mean, maybe, I don't know, but obviously the finishes haven't necessarily been there yet for Perez. It was unfortunate with Bahrain having the weird start there. Still regained to good position. At Imola had some issues there, which were just driver error. Just waiting for that clean weekend. And when he gets that clean weekend, qualifying P4, the potential's there this weekend, is going to be a big points day. And it's just a matter of time for Sergio in that second Red Bull seat. Yeah, if you can fit him into your lineup, you absolutely got to, right? So big fan of that move on your part. You got the extra like 1.8 mil to work with,
Yeah.
and you made it work with that move. And I gotta give a little golf clap to
Thank
that
you.
one, because that's an excellent move.
I was stunned that I could pull it off with the cap. Like I was like, when I was just tinkering around with it, I'm just like, who could I make work here? And I'm like,
because Leclerc is very expensive versus what you would maybe expect.
yeah, it's just name value and what he did in 2019 with
like
Ferrari.
There's less than a million difference between Perez and Leclerc, which is very surprising.
Very odd in their valuation of some of these teams and drivers, but feel good about that. Could be playing the long game with this one. Staying, I don't know how long I'm going to keep Perez in it before I make some switches, but with the value that I'm at with my team right now, I don't really feel the need to change much. So we'll see how long I stick with this lineup. It all depends on how well they do really come the race tomorrow for Portugal. So that's my top five. Do you have any more changes? Yes, you have one more.
Yes, I've got one more, and that's Russell out for Esteban Ocon. Russell, I thought was a decent shout for this weekend, but I just don't think the race pace for the Williams is there. So even though Russell gets a good qualifying performance, which he usually does, and obviously the best one he's had so far for Williams today, so even exceeding what you would maybe expect from him, I just like what Tsunoda brings in terms of race pace more, and I wanted to get Esteban Ocon in because I really like the Alpines this weekend from what I saw in practice, but specifically
looked at practice, did you?
Well, yeah, I don't think you completely ignore it, but I don't think you put everything into it. The big thing for me, though, was his performance here last year, where he qualified P11, finished P8, versus Daniel Ricciardo, who finished P10 and P9. And this was at a brand new track, I believe for both drivers, at least for Formula One, of course. Esteban coming back into Formula One, still finding his groove through that middle part of the season, versus Ricciardo, who was very, very set with Renault, very comfortable with that car, as we saw with performances like Imola, where he got on the podium. Ocon, in the races that he went out and beat Daniel Ricciardo, are very, very intriguing to me, and definitely have my eye as potential value picks for him this season. And that case is exactly here at Portimao, and it shows through in qualifying. A fantastic lap by Ocon in Q3 to go out and qualify P6. Big gap from him to his teammate Fernando Alonso, who I think is very overvalued in this game so far. And for Ocon at under 10 million on the cap, I think he's somebody that coming out of this weekend could definitely see a couple thousand or a couple 100,000, I guess it is, increase to his value here. So I really liked Ocon coming into this weekend. Alpine hasn't been great to start the season, but I like them coming into this race from, yes, what I saw in practice times, but that practice times combined with Ocon's performance last year, combined for the mixture to have him make my lineup.
I'm just poking fun at you.
I know.
Yeah, that's
hey,
the
I
changes.
I can take my licks.
That's the changes for the lineups this weekend. And of course, I've kept McLaren. I was close to putting Ferrari as my constructor. Should have probably put Ferrari.
I told you to. I got the receipts.
Sorry if I have a little bit of lack of faith in you for fantasy advice sometimes.
Or lack of faith in Ferrari, for crying out loud.
Well, can you blame me after the last season?
Remains to be seen what happens in the race. A lot can happen.
Yeah. But. So I kept with McLaren. They're the same on actual price budget, so it didn't matter which way I went with it. I just went with a gut feel with McLaren. Unfortunately, Danny Rick did not have a great qualifying effort, so that's going to bring down their total quite a bit this weekend, but hopefully they have some race pace and he can get close to the points, if not maybe score a point or two. If he has the race pace with McLaren, it'll take a lot of effort from him, but he's a fast starter. I could see him getting a couple places off the beginning, and then you have some weaker constructors that are ahead of him that I think the McLaren should be able to pass over the long haul of a race. So we'll see what happens with that. And then for yourself, you kept Red Bull, which is pretty self-explanatory.
Yep. I just think that it's great value because you've got the high end with Verstappen, who's going to be a race winner threat every single weekend, but you've also got Sergio Perez there who can boom as well. I just think it's a great mixture of good qualifying, good race day. And so for all of that combined, I just don't see the value in going with somebody else, taking a swing on a mid-pack team or mid-table team, I should say, who kind of has more variation race to race in terms of really needing to get kind of that 5th, 6th finishing position to really maximize the difference there between a Red Bull and a McLaren or Ferrari or anything like that. So I could have switched it up and maybe got a higher end driver in that lineup, but I feel safer about trying to pick out a specific driver having a good day versus a team.
Yeah, makes sense. I just like McLaren quite a bit.
Yeah.
So I think there's quite a bit of value with them. I'm still trying to figure out if a constructor being lesser so than, a Red Bull, which I had for the first week, is going to be more valuable long-term, or if it's going to be vice versa, where constructor is more valuable over race weekend. And you do what you're trying to do right now with Esteban Ocon, Yuki Tsunoda, and just trying to find those value picks race weekend to race weekend and make the budget work some way, somehow. So
I just need these guys to hit so I can get a budget increase and can afford these better picks.
Two different schools of thought so far through the first 3 weekends of F1 fantasy. But
Mine's
that's what we
much
love
more
to see.
Fun, I got to say.
Wow, okay. It's just throwing some shade at my
three changes. Come on, that's fun.
I had some fun putting Sergio Perez in my lineup, so I'll take that.
Winning's fun.
Yeah,
but
I think winning kind of tops that.
I'll have my fun spending like a half hour trying to figure out how the hell I'm going to get a decent lineup. But
sorry if I have a little bit of skepticism in my own abilities to make F1 decisions after my Mick Schumacher incident last time out. So, I'll leave it at that. I've just been off the ball lately with that kind of stuff. I don't know. But I think that does it for F1 fantasy picks and our in-depth kind of review. Let's get to our picks for the race itself, the podium, and the best of the rest. Of course, we have the advantage of knowing qualifying now, no qualifying predictions. But for the sake of it, I did think Max Verstappen would get pole this weekend, but that is pretty far from the truth as Mercedes locks out the front row with Valtteri Bottas and Lewis Hamilton.
There was a poll I saw, I think it was like motorsport.com or whatever, before qualifying started. Okay. I voted for Lewis Hamilton. If you want the receipts, I can pull them up.
No, I take your word for it.
I know.
I take your word for it. So fell 0.007 tenths of a second short, or thousandths of a second short of his 100th career pole in Formula One. Did Lewis Hamilton?
Do you remember what we said? Tracks that he would get the pole at?
I can't
remember.
I swear to God, I think I picked this track, and I don't know. I could be wrong on that.
I can't remember whether I picked this one or whether I picked Catalunya, but I don't know.
It might have been even. We have to go back and look at the tapes.
Look that up.
But
I should have written it down.
We should have written those down. But so Bottas ends up on pole, the third different pole sitter of the first 3 races of the season being Hamilton, Verstappen, and now, of course, Bottas. You expect those 3 to be up at the front, qualifying at the front for the majority of the races this season. I'll be curious to see if Sergio Perez can maybe pull out a pole position this season. Should be cool if he could do something like that for Red Bull. But that remains to be seen after this weekend. But it's the 2 top teams there, Mercedes and Red Bull, locking out the front 4. Then Carlos Sainz in 5th, Esteban Ocon 6th, Norris 7th, Leclerc 8th, Gasly 9th, and Sebastian Vettel makes his first Q3 appearance for Aston Martin in 10th, George Russell 11th, and then Antonio Giovinazzi 12th, Fernando Alonso 13th, Yuki Tsunoda 14th, Kimi Räikkönen 15th, and then your Q1 departures, Daniel Ricciardo, Lance Stroll, Nicholas Latifi, and the 2 Haas's of Mick Schumacher and Nikita Mazepin. So that's the starting grid come Sunday's Portuguese Grand Prix. Let's go from third. Well, do you want to do best of the rest first? That makes
best of the rest first.
Best of the rest first. Do you want to go first for this one, or should I?
I'd like you to go first for this.
Okay, one. Carlos Sainz. That's my guy this weekend. I feel really good about him just based off of race pace and what he did last season as well, finishing that well with the McLaren. The Ferrari looks pretty solid this weekend. I don't anticipate too much of a challenge from behind this weekend if Ferrari can execute the whole race itself, saying that it is Ferrari. But nonetheless, I think a top 5 finish is more than manageable for Carlos Sainz come the race.
Yeah, I'm also going with a Ferrari. I'm going to go with the other one, though. I'm going to say Charles Leclerc gets it done as the best of the rest. Only P8. Come on, let's not overreact. The mid pack gets quite
Surprised.
shaken up. Really, I find that surprising. Finished P4 here last year. Not the qualifying result that you maybe expected from him, but only 3/10 off of Carlos Sainz, and Sainz had the extra time on the softs in Q2 to be prepared for Q3 as well. Q3 was kind of all over the place with the changing wind and everything like that. But for Charles Leclerc, I like him come race day a little bit more than Carlos Sainz. I still think Sainz is going to be a great pick. Obviously, I hope so because I've got him in my lineup for crying out loud. But I think that this is going to be a really strong day for Ferrari. I think that they're the best of the rest team, and I think that's going to come to fruition on race day with both good days from Sainz and Leclerc. I'll say Leclerc gets it done ahead of Sainz.
I like it. I like it a lot. That's a good. I wasn't even looking at Leclerc, to be honest. I don't know. I guess it's just my fantasy lineup bias, but yeah, I'll take Carlos Sainz and Charles Leclerc for yourself. That's Ferrari duo. Man, I wish I picked Ferrari for my constructor. If that's the case, oh my god, so stupid. But let's get to the podium. You start us off with who's finishing in third.
Oh, who do I say finishes third? Well, I feel like I have at least a vague idea as to what you're going to do. And I got some faith in Mercedes this weekend, so we'll mix it up. I'll say Max Verstappen finishes P3.
Yeah, what's your vague understanding of what do you think I've done?
Either Perez third or Bottas third.
I'll go with the latter. Valtteri Bottas ends up in third for the Portuguese Grand Prix. I think this is going to be a pretty wild race. I could see Hamilton getting the jump off the start. And if that is the case, then Bottas is the one that is most vulnerable to the Red Bulls behind. And I think Verstappen's pace over the long haul of a race, despite him saying he hasn't been comfortable in the car the whole weekend, I mean, it's Max Verstappen at the end of the day. I think he can probably pull it off. So I have Valtteri Bottas finishing in P3 here. I think the two behind him in Hamilton and Verstappen are just on too much of a roll. They're just too consistent right now. And I think I'm going to be looking at a bit of a spice up there with the top three as Bottas goes from first to third.
I really thought about doing so. The thing that put me over just a little bit is how good the Mercedes specifically looked on the medium tire, especially. We'll see, obviously, what Red Bull does on that tire come race day, all that kind of stuff. But I think Mercedes has that slight edge over Red Bull for this weekend. Obviously, lots can happen off the race start. But I also don't love Perez as much here at Portimao. Last year, qualified P5, only finished P7 in the Racing Point, which was best of the rest last year. So would have expected a better result last year. We'll see if he can come through on race day. But I'm not sure how much he'll play into that podium battle unless there's a bit of chaos off the start. And so because of that, I've got Valtteri Bottas finishing second. I think it's going to be a Mercedes 1-2. I've got Bottas finishing second there. I don't know if maybe team orders will come into play or anything. If so, that would definitely be interesting to see how that plays out because we know what Bottas' stance is, at least from the Netflix documentary, Drive to Survive. We'll see if he actually follows through on that, if that comes to fruition. But I like Mercedes a bit more. I like Hamilton, though, obviously. I don't need to explain that. So I'll say Bottas finishes second.
All right. I've got Max Verstappen in second here. I don't think he'll quite be able to get up to the race victory here this time around. Yeah, I think he'll split the Mercedes. That's just basically what it comes down to for me with this split strategy. I think Red Bull's had plenty of time to think about how they're going to plan out this entire situation where they have the two Red Bulls to try and mess with the Mercedes. This is the best opportunity they've had in a long time where they have this situation. So I think Max Verstappen can do some damage, but I think he'll be probably a distant second, to be honest, at the end of this one with Hamilton being the victor for both of us.
Yeah, Hamilton winner. It feels like the obvious pick. Just given Mercedes has looked very strong all weekend. He won the race last year in dominant fashion. Everything seems to be pointing towards a Hamilton victory. Of course, anything can happen into turn one. Red Bull could show up and look very good in terms of race pace. we don't really know because the season has thrown us a lot of curveballs and we're only 2 races in.
Yeah.
So a lot can happen into turn 1 throughout that first lap, throughout the first stint. But I just think that there's that gap this race between the Mercedes and the Red Bull. And for that, I've got Hamilton first, Bottas second, and Verstappen third.
Yeah, same podium, just a little bit of a different order there. I've got Verstappen in second, Bottas in third. Hamilton is just the guy this weekend. I think he's, when I look back at last year, it was the chaotic start, of course, but he got Bottas on race pace. He passed him fair and square. It was, was no team orders in that situation, and he set sail from there. I think, it's a little bit of a different situation. They're both more accustomed to the track itself, but at the end of the day, I think Hamilton's planted that seed in Bottas's mind, and I think become, the long haul over the race. I think Hamilton will do some damage on Valtteri Bottas. He just has the race pace edge over Bottas with this car. So I definitely think they'll be close, but I think the start's going to be where this race gets defined. And I think Red Bull really gets into that mix and tries to do a little bit of damage, but it's just going to be all for naught as Hamilton comes up for top.
Might see a little send in a T1 there. Might see a little send.
It's such a tight corner. It's so weird, like the downhill and then just like it's
such
a really
fun track,
a really quick right. Yeah, I know it's a really great track. A lot of undulation, a lot of changes and everything.
I can't fathom like the MotoGP and stuff on that track. Like to be in a car and do that stuff is crazy enough in my mind. To be on like a bike and what
those guys are maniacs.
Like they are maniacs, man.
They're daredevils.
They're otherworldly. Yeah.
They got a special kind of blood type, I think, to try and do what they do. They're just unstoppable with what they can do. It's really impressive. So that does it, I think, for the podium predictions and the best of the rest and our fantasy selections, giving you our rationale. Of course, your lineups had to have already been set by the time we've given you this advice, but hopefully it gave you a bit of context into why we did our decisions for this upcoming weekend. But any final thoughts for this episode here for Formula One? Of course, we have Texas being a doubleheader weekend for IndyCar as well. We'll get that, just throw that in there as well, as Texas goes with IndyCar doubleheader, Saturday, Sunday, 3 straight weekends for IndyCar to start their season. Should be fun. But Formula One itself, what are you thinking?
Yeah, just a fun weekend overall. We had Wacker earlier today, their first race of their season at Spa, which was a lot of fun with the first hypercars race with the new the new format there and classes there. Busy weekend, obviously, with NASCAR. We already did our NASCAR show. If you haven't already checked that out, go ahead and check that out. But like IndyCar doubleheader, Formula One at a fun track in Portimao, Truck Series as well. Like there's a lot of really, really fun stuff this weekend. So already had a lot of entertainment today, a lot coming forward tonight, but especially a fun Sunday as well with Portsmouth leading things off.
Yeah, stressful weekend. Fantasy hockey is coming to an end as well. Like it's just
I lost in round 1 as the 1 seed. We don't need to talk about that.
Shall we? No. That's
I'd really rather not.
Fantasy's been all over the place, and we'll see what happens for fantasy on the motorsports side of things.
I gotta say, not on the motorsports side. On the hockey side, yes.
Clip that up. Yep, that's good. That was we'll edit that together.
Edit it so it sounds different. That's what I'll do.
But you're pulling for me in the other one, though. How about that?
I'll pull for you in hockey. Yeah, I'll do so. Yeah.
Appreciate that.
I'm here for Wacker's winners on the hockey side of things.
Thank you very much. It's been a fun week so far. Congratulations on your awards as well. I got to point that out. It's been a successful weekend for Mr. Cushman here for the Terra Awards. So congratulations to him.
Hopefully I didn't use up all my luck on the awards and don't get any fantasy luck. But we'll see.
Honestly, I wouldn't mind that. So
maybe split the difference. I don't know.
Maybe,
we'll see.
maybe. But make sure to follow us on Instagram at The Green Flag Pod, as well as Twitter at The Green Flag Pod. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Leave a like on this video if you enjoyed it. All the links to our social channels will be in the description of the YouTube video. But for this episode, I've been Lukas Wacker. He's been Kyle Cushman, signing off for now. I will talk to you to give you the race recaps of the IndyCar races at Texas and, of course, the Portuguese Grand Prix. Enjoy the racing, everybody.